I'm gonna turn it over to Rachel.
Thanks, Kathleen. Alrighty, introduction about the Western New York Land Conservancy. It's the organization that I work for. I'm the farmland protection specialist there, and I've been with the Land Conservancy for almost 6 years now. We're a nonprofit organization, so we're not governmental. We receive a lot of our funding from our members and grants and foundations. And what we do is we work with voluntary landowners to permanently protect open spaces. And that would include natural lands like forests and meadows and streams and that sort of thing. But also we protect working farms. We also partner with municipalities and other organizations to do other restoration and environmental projects throughout Western New York. We work in all 8 counties of Western New York, so we reach almost everyone on the call tonight. There's a few different ways that we can protect land. The first is probably the simplest, and that's just that we can own land. Usually requires a big capital campaign where we have to fundraise, and many people in the community come together and create a nature preserve, usually where people can go and visit and enjoy nature. We also use conservation easements, which are a legal agreement between a landowner and the Land Conservancy that limits what can be done on the piece of property. This is what we usually use for farmland protection because it allows the farmer to continue using the land for agriculture, but also makes a promise that it will always be available for farmland farming activity going into the future. We also do a thing called assisted transactions, which is where we help a landowner and sometimes a town or village or some other organization work together to permanently protect a piece of land. So it's sort of a combination package there. And then the last thing that we do is we work with communities directly to plan for open space conservation through mapping, exercises, and planning activities. In New York State and all across the nation, our farms are under threat. And that's part of the reason why my job exists. It's the reason why Kathleen is able to work connecting people who are looking for farmland and people who are looking for someone to take over their farm. Across the nation, 2,000 acres of ag land is lost every single day. These are numbers from American Farmland Trust. They're a national organization, sort of like the Land Conservancy, but they work exclusively on farmland protection efforts. And in New York State, just in about the last 15 years, we've lost over 250,000 acres of farmland just in New York State. So this is a problem that is facing farmers all across the country, but also here as well. So what are the reasons that protecting farmland is really important for your community? The first is economic reasons. These are our farmers are independent landowners. They run their own businesses and they are creating jobs, not only for themselves, but for the people who are working on their farms, and also for all of the agricultural support services like let's say tractor dealerships and repair shops and feed supply places and that sort of thing. So it's definitely a provider of jobs. And it is also bringing in tax revenue to the community where they're located. And in doing that, they're also requiring very few governmental services like lighting districts or garbage pickup, schools. So there's much less need for services compared to the tax revenue that they're bringing in. So agriculture is really good for a community's bottom line in terms of the economy. It also supports agritourism. If you think about what it's like to go to a maple, like a sugar shack in March, or if you're going apple picking or blueberry picking over the summer, doing a corn maze in the fall with your family. These are all agritourism activities that take you out to the farm. It's raising awareness of agriculture. It's giving you an opportunity to be close to the land and to buy products directly from the farmers. And then while you're out there, you'll probably stop for lunch or buy something when you're out in the community where you're visiting. And that keeps money in the local communities as well. And lastly, ecosystem services, which is sort of a technical jargony term for providing filtration of stormwater, air quality improvements that are provided just by natural spaces. Farmland is much more capable of absorbing a heavy rainfall during a fluke storm event than a residential subdivision is. And those benefits are seen downstream. So if you have a lot of protected farmland upstream, then it reduces the impact of flooding in your community. Paying to fix a flood damage is very expensive by comparison. So protecting your farmland in the first place will actually have a better economic impact on the communities throughout the region in that way. I'm just gonna have a sip of water here. Okay, so also our farmers have a way of providing us with some national security. Only 20% of the food that Americans eat comes from other countries. Some of that is great because it's stuff that we can't grow here ourselves, like the essential coffee bean or bananas. But there's a lot of food that we can produce locally here. It's better for the environment because you're not transporting it as far. It's getting to you faster, so the food is fresher, and it's not subject to any of the tumultuous things that happen across the world that might affect food trends, like severe weather or political unrest that could make importing those things more difficult. So being able to get our own food from our own land is certainly the easiest and safest way for us to have food security. Also, protecting farmland, our farmers are part of this interconnected network, and the more farm presence there is in a community, the better you're able to support agricultural support services. And as a farm leaves or a business leaves, it sort of is taking like this tapestry of your agricultural community and pulling out threads. And the more you unweave that tapestry, the thinner and weaker that fabric gets. So by keeping your farmland in your community in high numbers, it helps to solidify the viability of the farms that are in your community. And it provides some assurance to the farmers that are there that farming is going to continue as an important part of that community. And this is the last of my reasons to support farmland protection slide. Our American heritage is based on agriculture. You know, there was a time where most of us lived close to the land and knew exactly where our food was coming from. But today, most people live in urban areas and they work indoors. And so a lot of the longstanding traditions and practices are held by a small group of people who are still working the land. And by investing in their work and helping them protect their land and plan to save their land, it's helping continue that tradition and our heritage into the future. So that's my soapbox speech for why I think farmland protection is super important for everyone to be doing. Now the question is, when do we plan for agriculture? You don't have to wait for your farmland to be threatened or for someone to be selling, you know, one very well-known farm in your community in order for you to plan to protect it. While your farmland community is strong and that tapestry is woven, you know, thick and strong, you can plan to protect it then while your farms are thriving. And there is funding available for farmland protection planning, which I will touch on. So as soon as you can get funding to do that planning, it's smart to do it and get out ahead of it. It's much easier to protect your farms before they're all for sale. So, oops, there we go. So it is possible that you might live in a community where your farmland is not as plentiful as it once was. Maybe you've had a lot of development come through, but you still identify farming as an important part of your community's heritage, and an important part of your land base and economy. Is it worth it to do a full farmland protection plan? Maybe not, and that's okay. You can still do planning for farmland protection through adding a chapter to your farmland or to your comprehensive or master plan for your community. If you are in the process of updating it, incorporating a chapter dedicated to farmland protection is a really good way of doing this. And if your plan is recently completed, but you've decided that you didn't do enough to talk about farmland protection planning, you can add an addendum to your existing planning documents. So what will your farmland protection plan do for your community once you've put it together? First, it's going to identify the resources that need to be protected. And it's going to give not only the decision makers in town hall the opportunity to think and talk about farming, but it's going to bring it to the forefront of the minds of the residents who live in that community, who may work downtown and think that their food comes from a grocery store, and they may actually, through the process of planning for farmland protection in their community, get to know their farms locally a little bit better too. And just raising that awareness can help further farmland protection efforts in a town. Through your planning process, you're also going to provide a set of goals around which you can base your other land use decisions. As many of you know, your planning and zoning board of appeals members have to make consistent planning decisions that are not arbitrary or capricious. So you want to have something outlined that gives you a very clear path forward in terms of what your goals are for agriculture. It can also help you to do an update to your zoning code or other local ordinances like renewable energy siting ordinances, and identifying your agricultural resources and what you want to protect will help support revisions to some of those other documents that will help you make better decisions for the future of your community. So it's sort of like the backbone of doing all of that planning work. It also improves your chances of getting grant funding for other projects. Many of the grants that I work on, specifically working with individual farmers to protect their land, are super dependent upon the community being a spot that's supportive of agriculture. And by identifying that you value farmland and you value your farmers and the town is supportive of farming, and saying that you want to protect your farmland, all of those things are critical to having a successful grant application to protect those farms. So even if just one farmer in your community is able to protect their land through a grant by working with us because of your farmland protection plan, then you've done a great thing. It also tells your farmers in your community, we see you and we value you and we want to keep you around. And just doing that planning work can help strengthen your agricultural community behind this process. So what in Western New York have we done in terms of farmland protection planning? This is a map that I borrowed from the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets website. I want to first off say that I know it's not 100% correct, because I know that the town of Marilla, for example, has a farmland protection plan in place. This, I think, is mostly the communities that have received funding from Ag and Markets to do those plans. So it looks like Wyoming, Chautauqua, and Cattaraugus counties are in the process of doing a farmland protection plan. Erie, Niagara, Genesee, and Allegheny counties all have their plans completed already, which is great. Allegheny County, your plan is getting a little bit older, so you might want to be looking to update that. I think it's probably eligible for funding to do an update. And then you can see there are a couple of communities, mostly in Erie and a little bit in Genesee and Niagara counties, a couple of other outliers where the towns themselves have done farmland protection plans, which is excellent. But there's a lot of communities out there that have farms that could absolutely undertake a planning process and do better by their farmers. So for those of you that have a colored box on your town, you got a plan, you're done, right? Nope. you got to make sure that you are implementing that plan. And like Allegheny County, if your plan is more than 5 or 10 years old, it's time to start thinking about doing a revision or a rewrite if things have changed a lot. So how do you fund a farmland protection plan? There's a number of grants that exist out there from the New York State Department of Ag and Markets, and these are very generous, and the Department of Ag and Markets has a lot of resources that are available to help communities get their plans in place. There's a grant for municipalities, towns, up to $25,000. There's a cash match. And if you don't have a plan in place now, then you're eligible to apply for this funding. There's also grants for counties. The maximum for those is a little bit higher, just because it's a little more ground to cover and a little more work to get that plan in place. And if your plan is more than 10 years old, then you're eligible for an update. So to find out more information about either of those grants, go to agriculture.ny.gov. There are a few places throughout my slideshow where I've pulled information from their resources and guides. So if you are interested in exploring doing farmland protection planning for your community, definitely check out the agriculture.ny.gov website for more. And then there's also county funding. The Erie County now has an Office of Agriculture that has a new grant program to help communities update their farmland protection plans, comp plans, zoning, and other ordinances to improve how they address farmland protection. I think this round of funding is complete. So if you have missed that, you'll want to go to erie.gov/agriculture to check out future rounds of funding and see what else the Office of Agriculture is doing. I'm sure that there are other funding streams, and if you're looking for something beyond this, contact me and we can do a little bit more digging, but these are just the quick ones that people use most often when doing their local plans. So the first step to actually creating your plan is to establish a steering committee. The steering committee is probably going to be comprised of people who are on your town board, planning board, your conservation advisory boards. You might have agricultural businesses in your town where representatives would be able to come and serve on your committee and advise you. Invite your farmers. The people who actually do farm the land in your town are going to know it better than anybody. So make sure that they're given an opportunity to participate in the process. And then the last, and maybe keystone piece of your steering committee is to hire a consultant that has a background in farmland protection planning and rural community issues. Unless you have a professional planning staff for your community, it might be too big of a lift to do without a consultant. And you're really going to get somebody who's going to work for you and come to the table with a lot of information, resources, and ideas that can help steer your community in the right direction for putting this plan together. Once the steering committee is set, you're all going to want to come up with a public participation plan, which includes a meeting schedule. And this information should be published and available to everyone in your community. So on the town or village website or county website. But you also want to put it other places. My experience working with farmers these last few years is that very few of them spend a lot of time perusing the internet. And some of them don't have internet access at all. So if you're able to post meeting notices in local newspapers or let's say the local restaurant, I was going to say, if they're open, but also Tractor Supply or other ag support services or your local farm service agency office, post the meeting notices in those places as well. So you're able to get everybody and not just the internet browsing population. And then, of course, welcome your farmers to attend all of your meetings. You know, you may have one meeting that you think, well, we invited the farmer to the meeting in, June, but in June they were busy, planting something. Maybe the next meeting they can make is on a rainy day in September. So make it possible for them to come in whenever suits their schedule. It's hard to plan around that. So make them welcome at all times. So you get your committee and your consultant together, and the first step in developing your plan is to create your draft table of contents. And mostly that's going to be based on what the key local issues are for your town. And the people that are on your steering committee should be able to help you outline what those things are. But also, if you've received grant funding for your plan, you want to make sure that you're hitting all of the requirements for your grant. So make sure that your table of contents reflects what the grant requires. As I mentioned, Ag and Market's website has a ton of great resource documents. A lot of the information that I'm sharing with you tonight comes from the key elements of a good plan documents that Ag and Markets has published on their website. There's also some other information and then samples of completed plans that are a really great source of inspiration. You can see things that other communities have incorporated that maybe you hadn't thought of, or if you know of a community that you think your community might be like in 5 or 10 years, you can take a look at what their plans say as a thought to the future. And then you also want to develop a table that identifies what you're going to achieve and by when, so that way you can stay on target and actually complete your plan, especially if you're operating under a grant timeline restriction. So let's look at the nitty-gritty of exactly what you're going to put into your plan. So the first thing is an analysis of your local conditions and issues. Where are your best farm soils? Where are your existing farms? What agricultural support services are located in your town? Where is development happening? Where are you seeing agriculture be reduced, or where are you seeing it flourish? Are there changes in ownership of your farmland base? These are things that you can talk about in this section. The second thing you want to do is a SWOT analysis, which this diagram on the right explains pretty well. It's an acronym that stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So you want to look for areas of strong points and weak points, things that are opportunities for your community to do better and to support your farmers or to protect your farmland. And then threats would be things that are influencing your farmland, perhaps external threats. Something that's happening outside of the community that's starting to have an impact on trends on your lands. So just going through that process can help you look for areas that you want to continue to build upon, but also areas where you've got room for improvement. The third thing you want to do is define agriculture for your town. This is something that you might really benefit from working with your consultant on developing. Does your community have urban agriculture or hobby farming? Are those things considered agriculture in the eyes of the town? These are things that you'll want to think about and make sure that you write down in your plan. And then moving on, you want to talk to your farmers and the people who are working in agricultural support services that are actually working in your town. You can do this by using either a focus group where you invite small groups to come together and there's sort of an exchange of ideas and somebody records that and then you infuse those thoughts into your plan. But you might also benefit from doing some individual interviews. Farmers are, they're running their own businesses. They may not want you to know that their biggest concern is some private matter that they don't want to share with their neighbor, but anonymously, they'd be willing to share it with you because it's going to help the town help them through this difficulty. So giving them that one-on-one time to share private and personal experiences with you is another great way of making sure that you're getting the whole story. And then you want to create a vision statement and outline some goals for what you want farming to look like in your town moving into the future. Is are you happy with the way farmland and agriculture is in your town right now? Do you want it to expand? Do you want it to diversify? Do you want to see it change somehow? And these are the things that you want to talk about here. As you're looking to the future, how do you see farming in your town or county? I keep saying town, so please know that if I say town and you are representing a county or village, or some other kind of region that you are planning for, please know that that's what I mean, even if I just say town repeatedly. Now, this is my favorite part because I love maps more than the average person, but it is very important for you to include a series of maps in your farmland protection plan. There's a list on the screen here: prime soils, existing farms, rented lands, zoning, ag districts, parcels receiving ag assessment, priorities for protection, areas where growth is happening or where you want to direct growth, and then incorporating any maps from some of your other planning documents like your comp plan. All of these things are useful in your plan. The one thing that, as an employee of a nonprofit who works on farmland protection projects, one of the things that's really important to me is that you're mapping the areas that you want protected. The grants that we use to protect those farms specifically ask, is this farm mapped as a priority for protection at the local level? So if you say we want to protect our, the farms that have prime soils, okay, well, looking at the map on the screen there from the town of Eden, if your farm is located in a green spot, I can say, yeah, that's a spot that the town has identified as being a priority for protection. It's shown on the map as being a prime soils spot. So making sure that you have those graphics in your plan will really help communicate your vision to other people in the community, to funders, and to each other. What else to put in your plan? You want to do an analysis of your existing zoning and subdivision regulations. Take a look and see if they're farm friendly. This could be something as simple as your setback requirements for fences are unreasonably restrictive in the agricultural zoning district so that it limits the amount of pasture area that a farm is able to have. Or in a rural residential zoning district, are you allowing farmers to have a roadside market or stand? If the answer to those questions is no, your community might have room to grow and to improve the existing zoning and subdivision regulations that you have in place. And so if you do this analysis, it's okay to say, this regulation is not as farm friendly as we'd like it to be. And that could be a good motivation for a recommendation to do an update of those plans down the road. So it's okay to recognize your shortcomings because it will give you the impetus to improve. You want to take a look at where your water and sewer lines are in relation to your farmland. While water lines can be helpful if you're running an agricultural operation and your local well water isn't adequate, that's one thing, but it's also said that that water and sewer lines grow houses. So if you look in your community where those water and sewer lines are running, it's probably a pretty good indicator that those are the places where you might see residential developments and other kinds of land uses come in the coming years, because that infrastructure is there ready for people to hook up to. So just analyzing that and thinking about what's there now, is that a priority for protection? In your plan, you want to also sort of do a listing and consideration of the different tools that you can use to protect farmland in your community. I've listed a few on the slide there: agricultural protection zoning, buffers, right to farm ordinances, farmland mitigation requirements, cluster or conservation subdivision and development regulations. You'll want to think about what's the best fit for your town. What do you want there? TDR and PDR are on there. I probably should have spelled those out. That's transfer of development rights and purchase of development rights. Those are two different ways to permanently protect your land. PDR is mostly what I do through grant funding through New York State, purchase of development rights for farmland. So sort of dig into those and talk about what things you think you want to do moving forward that might help solidify your farm base. As I mentioned, specifically identify the areas to be protected. If you're making a map that shows all of your prime soils or where your existing farms are, if you don't say somewhere in the body of your plan that you actually want to protect those things, then the map is kind of pointless. So make sure that you're including in the narrative of your plan exactly what your goals are for those resources. You also want to record, document or record your farmer and public involvement in the development of your plan. You want people who pick up your plan to understand exactly how much work you've put into getting information from your community, to make sure that it's clear that this is a public process and the plan reflects the goals and desires of the people who live and work in your town. Lastly, you'll want to include a recommendations section of your plan. This should include an executive summary. Not everyone will want to sit down and read the 30 to 90 pages of plan that you've painstakingly put together. And I know that that makes you sad, but they won't do it. So if you put together an executive summary that hits the main points, you're more likely to communicate your message more broadly. You want to make sure that you're including a list of what your agricultural protection recommendations are. And that can include, no net loss of farmland, or no loss of more than 10% of our farmland, or other activities and programs and strategies that your community can participate in that will help promote and support your agricultural community. Some of these things are actually bonus points criteria on farmland protection grants. So if your community has a farm market that the town or village sponsors, that can help strengthen an application for farmland protection grant. You can also host agricultural fairs or festivals. And, as we did our poll at the very beginning and we talked about the lack of new or next generation farmers to help carry on the agricultural tradition as our farmers are aging and retiring. If we care about that, we can help support the pipeline to generate new farmers through 4-H and FFA programs and that sort of thing. And then lastly, in terms of recommendations, you want to be sure that you think about who is going to implement your plan once you're done writing it. Do you have an advisory committee, a conservation advisory committee or a farmland protection committee that exists already that will take over and implement your plan? Or do you need to create one that's going to be responsible for moving this forward? And this is the spot to do it. Once you have finished putting all of the pieces together, you'll want to make sure that you have at least one public hearing. You might want to do more than one, just to make sure that you have the opportunity to get feedback on what you've put together. Make sure that you've done right by your citizens and by your farmers to make sure that your plan says all of the things that it needs to say. And it also gives you the opportunity to share the outcome of your planning process with the people who have participated or maybe didn't have a chance to participate because of whatever's going on in their lives. But it gives them that one last opportunity to be a part of the process. If you are representing a municipal board, you'll want to refer your plan to the County Ag and Farmland Protection Board to review and recommend approval for. I actually serve on the Erie County Ag and Farmland Protection Board, and we recently reviewed a plan from one of our communities, and we got to sit down and talk with them and sort of work through their plan with them and ask some questions, and it really helped strengthen the relationship, I think, between the individuals that are doing farmland activity in that town, and helped us understand what the local issues are. So it's a great opportunity for sharing information. If you have your local plan, you'll want to get it approved by your legislative board, your town board. If you have a county plan, you want the county legislature or board of supervisors to approve it. And then you'll want to send it off to New York State Department of Ag and Markets to get the commissioner's approval. This is not required of every plan, but if you are using some of that funding from Ag and Markets, that's one of the requirements, I believe, for their funding. So even though I mentioned earlier that the town of Marilla was not on the map as receiving a grant from Ag and Markets, they did send their plan to the commissioner and get it approved. So you don't necessarily have to have the state's funding to get their blessing on your plan. So I do see a few things that recur as common mistakes or opportunities to do better. And that the first bullet is to make sure you actually say that you want to protect farmland. I was looking at a plan most recently, and it talked about how their farmland is super important to them, and they talked about the areas in the community where it was really strong. And then they never said they wanted to protect it or keep it or conserve any of the land. And so when I thought, can I do a successful farmland protection grant application for this farmer to help them protect their land, I couldn't use the community's plan to back up that they support farmland protection. So it's not enough to just do a farmland protection plan if you don't say you want to protect it. So go ahead and put that in there. It seems obvious, but it's not. You got to say it. Mapping the priorities for protection. I think I covered that pretty well earlier. Make sure, maybe you don't want to map the specific farms that you want to protect, but if you say, the northeast corner of the town is a particularly strong agricultural center, this is the area of the town that we see as the highest priority for protection, map it. And then I can answer that question honestly. Yes, they did map that as a priority for protection. And it will help also communicate to future town boards, future planning boards, that those are the areas that were identified as a big priority for the people who lived in the town when the plan was created. So even if, the town board seats change, you still have those broader recommendations shown on a map, which a lot of people will be able to interpret pretty quickly. Last thing is implement your plan. It's really, really sad when you see a community work really hard to put a plan together and then they shelf it. And there are a lot of community plans on shelves collecting dusts in county planning offices. I have seen many of them very, very dusty. It's important to outline how you're going to implement your plan and who's going to do it. My one experience with seeing a plan really, really well implemented is the Erie County Ag and Farmland Protection Plan. Part of that process was developing an implementation matrix, which was basically a spreadsheet that outlines what all of the different goals and objectives are. They're prioritized based on need and possibility. It also identifies who the responsible person would be for each of those items and who the partners might be that could help bring that goal over the finish line. And those things also identified costs and possible funding to help achieve those goals. That matrix was updated by the county planning staff and brought to every single meeting of the Ag and Farmland Protection Board. And it's discussed at each meeting. And as we go through the list of things that we could or should be doing, it's an easy outline for what the next step is, who we work with, who we talk to, and we come back to the next meeting and talk about what was done in the space of time since the last meeting. It's a really fantastic and successful way of making sure that your plan goes from being, a 60-page document to being a to-do list. And last thing that I think you should be sure to plan on doing is updating your plan. If you think that things may change in 5 years, include a recommendation to review your plan in 5 years. If you think it needs to be completely rewritten in 10 years, in 9 years, say, write a grant application to get more funding to update your plan. So make sure to plan for your plan and you'll be successful. So this is my touchy-feely slide at the end here where I tell you I'm going to work really hard as the farmland protection specialist for the Land Conservancy to work with individual landowners to write grants and protect their individual farms. And that's great. And I'm going to work really hard at that. But when it comes to what happens across your communities, you at the local levels, at the county planning board, at the county ag and farmland protection board, you have the ability to look at the broader picture, plan for the future, and establish a set of goals and base your codes around it. What you do to support farming in your community is going to do far more than I can do through grants to protect individual pieces of property. So make sure that your farming community knows that you support them and do this planning effort to actually make that a common practice in the town. So that's my plea for go out there and do it, you guys. You've got the tools, you've got resources. If you have questions, I'm happy to talk to you about it. And go out there and help your farmers keep going.